It was a cold, quiet evening in the sleepy town of Ridgewood. Emily sat at her kitchen table, her fingers nervously drumming against the polished wood surface. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the heater. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 9:45 p.m. David was late again. For weeks now, Emily had noticed subtle changes in her husband. He was coming home later than usual, often with vague excuses about work meetings or last-minute errands. There was a new guardedness about him, a distance that hadn't been there before. At first, she brushed it off as paranoia, but the doubt gnawed at her. Tonight, she couldn't ignore it any longer. David had left the house an hour ago, claiming he needed to check on a delivery route for his job. But Emily wasn't convinced. She reached for the small remote-controlled toy car she had hidden in the pantry. Equipped with a tiny camera and microphone, it was her secret weapon in uncovering the truth. As she powered up the device, her heart pounded with a mix of guilt and determination. She wasn't proud of spying on her husband, but the questions swirling in her mind left her no choice. Just one night, she whispered to herself. I just need to know what's going on. She placed the car on the driveway, its small wheels crunching against the gravel. Through her phone's screen, she could see the car's camera feed. She guided it down the street, trailing David's car as he made his way through town. The chase led her to a part of Ridgewood she rarely visited, a rundown industrial area on the outskirts. David parked his car in front of an abandoned warehouse, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. Emily's pulse quickened. What are you doing here, David? She murmured. She maneuvered the toy car closer, keeping it hidden in the shadows. The camera's feed revealed David stepping out of his car, carrying a black briefcase. He glanced around nervously before walking toward the warehouse's side entrance. Suddenly, another figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man in a leather jacket. The two exchanged a quick handshake, and David handed over the briefcase. The man opened it briefly, revealing stacks of what appeared to be cash. Emily's stomach dropped. What is this? She muttered under her breath. The man said something to David, but the car's microphone only picked up fragments of their conversation. Words like shipment and deadline sent her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. As the men disappeared into the warehouse, Emily guided the toy car closer to the entrance. She needed to see more, to hear more. But just as the car approached the doorway, it hit a small rock and got stuck. No, no, no. Emily hissed, frantically trying to reverse the car. The screen froze for a moment before the feed cut out entirely. Panic set in. Her only link to David's secret world was gone. She sat frozen, staring at the blank screen, torn between fear and curiosity. Should she leave it alone and wait for David to come home? Or should she follow him into the warehouse and confront the truth head-on? The thought of stepping into the unknown terrified her, but the nagging questions refused to let her rest. Grabbing her coat and keys, she made a decision. I can't ignore this, she whispered, her voice trembling. With a deep breath, Emily stepped out into the cold night, her heart pounding as she drove toward the warehouse, determined to uncover what her husband was hiding. The warehouse loomed in the distance, but as Emily drove closer, her thoughts drifted to how it all began. On the surface, her life with David had always seemed perfect, almost too perfect. They met at a local cafe in Ridgewood 10 years ago. David had just moved to town, fresh out of college and eager to start his career. His easygoing smile and quick wit had swept Emily off her feet. Their early days together were the stuff of romantic comedies, surprise dates, late-night talks under the stars, and promises of a bright future. David landed a job as a logistics manager for a regional distribution company, and Emily decided to leave her marketing career to focus on their growing family. She became a stay-at-home mom, finding joy in raising their two young daughters, Ava and Lily. For years, life seemed idyllic. David's job provided well for the family, and Emily took pride in their cozy home on Maple Drive, where neighbors waved hello, and kids played freely in the yards. But over time, small cracks began to form in the facade of their marriage. It started subtly, David coming home later than usual, distracted and tired. At first, Emily thought it was just work stress. Logistics is a demanding field, she'd tell herself. But then there were the phone calls he'd take in hushed tones, the text messages he'd quickly swipe away when she walked into the room. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, Emily decided to ask him directly. "David, is everything okay at work?" "You've been so distant lately," she said, trying to keep her tone light. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine, Em. Just a lot going on with a new client. Nothing to worry about." She wanted to believe him, but the unease in her chest wouldn't go away. It was her best friend, Monica, who planted the seed of suspicion. "I don't mean to make you paranoid," Monica had said over coffee one afternoon, "but I've seen it happen before. Late nights, secretive behavior. Are you sure he's just busy with work?" Emily laughed it off at the time, but the words stuck with her. That's when she began to notice the little things, how David's car always seemed to have more mileage than it should, how he sometimes smelled faintly of cigarette smoke even though he didn't smoke. Then there was the night she found the receipt. While tidying up the living room, she came across a crumpled piece of paper in David's jacket pocket. It was for a large cash withdrawal from the local ATM, far more money than they usually carried. Why would he need that much cash, she wondered aloud. David's behavior wasn't the only thing troubling Emily. As a stay-at-home mom, she often felt isolated, her world revolving around school drop-offs, grocery runs, and PTA meetings. She missed the thrill of her career, the sense of purpose she once had. These feelings of inadequacy only heightened her insecurities about David's behavior. And then came the night of the toy car. It was Ava's 8th birthday, and David had brought home a shiny new remote-controlled car as a gift. While the girls played with it, Emily noticed the tiny camera attached to its hood. "Isn't it cool?" David had said, showing her how to operate it. It was meant for the kids, but in Emily's restless mind, it became something else, a tool to confirm or dismiss her growing fears. The idea took root during one of David's late-night absences. Emily sat in the living room, the toy car on the floor in front of her, and the seed of suspicion blossomed into action. She downloaded a camera app on her phone, linked it to the car, and tested its range. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself, but she couldn't stop. That night marked the beginning of her secret surveillance. For a week, she followed David from a distance, the toy car trailing his movements. Most of the time, he drove to innocuous places, grocery stores, gas stations. But tonight was different. The warehouse was unlike anything she'd seen before. As Emily parked her car a few blocks away, her mind raced with questions. Was Monica right? Was David hiding something sinister? Or was she overreacting, letting her jealousy and insecurity drive her to extremes? She couldn't shake the memory of the briefcase exchange. The sight of the cash inside haunted her. It didn't add up. David's salary was enough to cover their expenses, and they weren't in any financial trouble. Emily's heart ached as she thought about their daughters. If David was in trouble, it would affect all of them. She needed answers, not just for herself but for her family. Gathering her courage, she stepped out of her car and made her way toward the warehouse. The building loomed large and foreboding, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls a stark contrast to the cozy streets of Ridgewood. Standing in the shadows, Emily debated her next move. She could feel her pulse quickening, her breath coming in short bursts. She thought of the life they'd built together, the trust that now seemed so fragile. "David," she whispered to herself, "what have you gotten yourself into?" With one last deep breath, Emily stepped forward, determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it might be. Emily stood frozen outside the warehouse, the cold night air biting at her cheeks. The scene played over and over in her mind, David handing over the briefcase, the strange man's suspicious glances, and the haunting words she had overheard. Her heart told her to turn back, to wait for David at home and confront him directly. But her gut told her she was already in too deep to walk away. She took a deep breath and edged closer to the warehouse. The faint sound of muffled voices carried through the night. She pressed herself against the cold metal wall, trying to steady her shaking hands. There was a side door slightly ajar, the dull yellow glow of light spilling out into the darkness. Peeking inside, Emily saw a narrow hallway lined with old machinery and boxes. Her eyes followed the faint hum of voices until they landed on a door at the end of the corridor. The voices were clearer now. David's voice was unmistakable, but it was tinged with a nervousness she'd never heard before. Emily's curiosity burned, but her fear wrestled with it. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew she couldn't go back without answers. She slipped inside, her footsteps muffled by the dusty concrete floor. As she moved closer, fragments of the conversation reached her ears. "You said the shipment would be secure," David's voice came, tense and agitated. "It is secure," the other man replied, his tone calm but laced with authority. "You just need to keep your end of the deal. No mistakes this time." Mistakes? Shipment? Emily's stomach churned. What had David gotten himself into? She crouched behind a stack of crates near the open door, her breath caught in her throat. Through a crack, she could see David standing opposite the man she had seen earlier, a tall, imposing figure in a leather jacket, his face partially obscured by shadows. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder, sliding it across a table to David. "All the details are here," he said. "Follow these instructions to the letter. If you do, everything will stay clean." David hesitated, his hands trembling as he opened the folder. Emily strained to see the contents but could only catch glimpses, photographs, addresses, and what looked like maps. "I'm not sure about this," David muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned forward, his tone hardening. "You don't have a choice anymore. You're in this now. If you back out, there'll be consequences, for you and your family." Emily's blood ran cold. Her first instinct was to storm in and drag David out of there, but she knew it would only make things worse. She needed to understand the full picture before confronting him. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse. Emily flinched, her heart racing. One of the crates she had been leaning on shifted slightly, its contents rattling. "Did you hear that?" the man asked, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. David turned toward the door, his expression a mix of fear and suspicion. "What was that?" Emily held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. She crouched lower, her fingers gripping the edge of the crate as footsteps approached. The man peered into the shadows, his gaze sharp and probing. "Probably just the wind," he muttered after a moment, turning back to David. "We're done here. Remember, no mistakes." David nodded silently, clutching the folder to his chest as the man exited through another door. Emily stayed frozen in place, watching as David ran a hand through his hair, his face etched with worry. As soon as he was alone, David let out a shaky sigh and slumped into a chair. He opened the folder again, flipping through the pages with a mix of dread and determination. Emily's heart broke seeing him like this. Whatever he was involved in, it was clear he was in over his head. She wanted to rush to him, to demand answers, but her instincts told her to wait. She needed more information before she confronted him. She watched as David carefully folded the documents back into the folder and tucked it under his arm. He stood, took one last look around, and made his way toward the door. Emily knew she couldn't stay hidden any longer. She slipped out from behind the crates and followed him at a safe distance, her heart pounding with every step. David exited the warehouse and headed toward his car. Emily ducked behind a rusted truck, watching as he placed the folder in the trunk and drove off into the night. She hurried back to her own car, her mind racing. Questions swirled in her head. What was in the folder? Who was that man? And, most importantly, what had David gotten himself involved in? As she started her engine and trailed David's car from a distance, Emily resolved to find out the truth. She didn't know what she would discover, but she knew one thing for certain: her life was about to change forever. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she followed David's car through the quiet streets of Ridgewood. The town she had known her entire life now seemed cloaked in mystery. The man she thought she knew so well had become a stranger, and the truth felt just out of reach. David's car turned onto a secluded road leading toward the edge of town, where an abandoned factory stood. Emily slowed her pace, keeping her distance. He parked near the building, stepped out with the folder in hand, and walked inside. Emily's pulse quickened. The factory was notorious in Ridgewood, a crumbling relic of the past that had become a haven for urban explorers and, as rumors suggested, less savory activities. She parked her car a safe distance away and made her way toward the building on foot, careful to stay hidden. As she approached, she noticed a faint glow coming from one of the upper floors. The sound of muffled voices reached her ears once again. She found an open side door and slipped inside, her every step echoing in the cavernous space. The factory smelled of mildew and decay. Rusted machinery stood like silent sentinels, and broken windows let in the cold night air. Emily's breath formed small clouds as she made her way up a rickety staircase toward the voices. At the top, she crouched behind a wall, peering into a large room. David was there, standing with a group of 3 men. One of them, an older man with a grizzled beard, seemed to be in charge. On a table between them lay the folder David had brought, along with a stack of papers, a laptop, and several unmarked boxes. Emily strained to hear their conversation. "Is everything in place?" the grizzled man asked, his voice low and gravelly. David nodded hesitantly. "Yes, but I still don't understand why you need me for this. I'm not cut out for." "You're cut out for whatever we say you are," the man interrupted sharply. "We've gone over this. You're the perfect cover. A family man, a clean record. No one would suspect you." Emily's stomach churned. What did they mean by cover? One of the other men, younger and dressed in a leather jacket, chimed in. "Relax, buddy. All you have to do is make the drop. In and out, no one gets hurt." David's face paled. "And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," the grizzled man said firmly. "As long as you stick to the plan." Emily's mind raced. A drop? No one gets hurt? The pieces were falling into place, but she still didn't have the full picture. She shifted her weight, trying to get a better view, but the floorboard beneath her creaked loudly. The men froze. "What was that?" the younger man snapped, his eyes darting toward the doorway. Emily's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. "Probably just rats," the grizzled man muttered. "This place is crawling with them." David glanced nervously toward the doorway but didn't say anything. After a tense moment, the men returned to their conversation. Emily knew she couldn't stay hidden for long. She needed to act, but she also needed to be careful. Her mind raced as she tried to come up with a plan. Just then, the younger man opened one of the unmarked boxes, revealing a collection of small, tightly packed bags. Even from her hiding spot, Emily recognized what they were. Drugs. Her worst fears were confirmed. David was involved in something illegal, something dangerous. Suddenly, David spoke up, his voice trembling. "I want out. I didn't sign up for this. You said it was a one-time thing, and now you're dragging me deeper." The grizzled man's expression darkened. "You're in this until I say you're out." And if you ever think about talking, remember what's at stake. Your wife. Your kids. Emily's blood ran cold. These men weren't just dangerous, they were ruthless. In that moment, she realized she couldn't stay silent any longer. If David was in over his head, she needed to get him out, no matter the risk. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she explained the situation to the operator, giving them the address and details. "Please hurry," she pleaded. "My husband's life is in danger." As she ended the call, the younger man turned toward the doorway again, his eyes narrowing. "I'm telling you, there's someone here," he said, pulling a gun from his jacket. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had seconds to act. Grabbing a rusted metal pipe from the floor, she stepped into the doorway, her heart pounding. "Leave him alone," she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. The men turned toward her, their faces a mix of shock and anger. "Emily?" David gasped, his eyes wide. Before the men could react, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows, and the room erupted into chaos. The younger man lunged toward Emily, but she swung the pipe, catching him in the arm. He stumbled back, cursing, as the grizzled man barked orders. "Grab the stuff and go." David ran to Emily, grabbing her hand. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, panic in his voice. "Saving you," she replied, her eyes blazing with determination. The police stormed the building moments later, their shouts filling the air. The men scattered, but the officers quickly apprehended them. As David and Emily were led outside, she turned to him, her voice trembling. "We need to talk. No more secrets." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never wanted this." The night wasn't over, but the truth was finally coming to light. The flashing lights of police cars painted the night sky in hues of red and blue, their reflections dancing on the cracked windows of the old factory. Emily stood outside, shivering, not just from the cold but from the weight of everything that had just unfolded. The scene around her was chaotic. Police officers were handcuffing the men she had seen with David, while others were combing the building for evidence. David stood beside her, his face pale, his eyes filled with guilt and disbelief. His body was stiff, as if he were still in shock, processing the surreal turn of events. "We're safe now," Emily whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure him or herself. The night had spiraled into something she never could have imagined. Just hours ago, they had been a family with typical, if sometimes strained, troubles. Now, their lives had been turned upside down by David's secret involvement in a dangerous, illegal operation. As the officers led the men away, Emily caught sight of one of them, the man who had been in charge, the one with the grizzled beard. He glanced over his shoulder and locked eyes with her. The look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. There was something cold, calculating in his gaze, as if he were silently promising that this wasn't over. "David, we need to go home," Emily said, pulling him gently by the arm. David didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding before him, his mind clearly elsewhere. Emily gave him a soft, understanding squeeze on the arm, and he finally turned to her, his face crumpling in an expression of exhaustion and regret. "I don't even know where to begin," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "This whole thing, everything, I never thought it would go this far. I never wanted to get involved, but I was so scared of what would happen if I said no." Emily nodded, leading him away from the flashing lights and towards their car. "We'll figure it out. Together." As they drove home, the silence between them was heavy, thick with the unspoken questions and the raw emotions they were both struggling to process. David had always been the reliable, hard-working husband. The man who would do anything for his family. But now, everything had changed. He had become entangled in something far darker than either of them could have imagined, and they both knew the consequences of his involvement weren't just going to disappear. The next few days felt like a blur. David had been questioned by the police and, though he wasn't arrested, his name was now part of an ongoing investigation. He had come clean to Emily about everything, the pressure he had felt, the threats that had been made against him and their family. He explained how he had been lured into a criminal network under the guise of a simple, high-paying job, only to find himself in over his head. But it wasn't just David who was affected. Emily had learned that the ripple effect of his actions was far-reaching. In the small town of Ridgewood, rumors spread like wildfire. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives began to whisper. It wasn't just David's reputation at stake, it was theirs. People began to treat them differently, the once friendly smiles replaced with looks of judgment and pity. One evening, after David had returned from a meeting with his lawyer, Emily found him sitting alone on their front porch, his head in his hands. "David," she began, her voice soft, "we've been through hell, but this is just the beginning. We need to face what's coming, no matter how difficult it is." David looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and tired. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make things right." Emily sat down next to him, her heart aching for the man she still loved, despite everything. "We'll figure it out. We have to. But you're not alone in this, David. I won't let you face this alone." David took a deep breath, wiping his face with his sleeve. "The worst part is knowing that I put you in danger. I've never been afraid of anything, not really. But now, I'm terrified. I don't know who else they might hurt." Emily reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "The only way out is through. We'll face whatever comes, and we'll make it through together." That night, as Emily lay awake in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that still clung to her. David was safe, for now. But she knew this was far from over. The men he had been involved with were still out there, and the shadow they had cast over her family was deep. She had to be strong, for both of them, but the uncertainty weighed on her. Days turned into weeks, and the fallout from David's involvement in the criminal operation continued to spread. The police had made several arrests, but many of the men involved were still at large. David's lawyer worked tirelessly to ensure he wasn't implicated in anything worse, but Emily could see how the pressure was affecting him. One afternoon, as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills that seemed to multiply by the day, the doorbell rang. She hesitated before answering, her heart sinking at the thought of more bad news. When she opened the door, she wasn't prepared for what she saw. A well-dressed man stood on the porch, a briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Clark?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an undertone of urgency. "Yes?" Emily replied, trying to mask the anxiety in her voice. "I'm with the district attorney's office," the man said, holding up a badge. "I need to speak with your husband. It's regarding his involvement in the ongoing investigation." Emily's stomach twisted. This was it. The moment they had feared. David walked into the room, his face draining of color as he saw the man at the door. He stepped forward cautiously, his voice hoarse. "What's this about?" "We need to talk," the man said. "It's about the evidence we found. And it's about to get much worse before it gets better." David looked at Emily, his eyes full of sorrow and fear. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking, but she held firm. They were in this together, and no matter how bad things got, she wouldn't let him go down alone. The next few weeks felt like a slow unraveling of everything Emily and David had known. Each day brought new challenges, and each new revelation seemed to cast a deeper shadow over their lives. David had cooperated fully with the authorities, explaining how he had been manipulated into the illegal activities and expressing his remorse. Despite his cooperation, the damage was already done. The town of Ridgewood, which had once felt like a tight-knit community, now felt foreign and cold. People who had once greeted David with friendly waves and nods now avoided eye contact. They weren't just judging him, they were judging her, too. Emily could feel the weight of their whispers every time she went out to the grocery store or bumped into someone at the post office. The district attorney's office had built a case, but David had managed to avoid the worst of it. His role was still under investigation, and although no formal charges had been filed, his reputation was forever stained. There were moments when Emily felt as though she were living in a fog, uncertain of where the road ahead would lead. But one thing was clear, their lives could never go back to how they had been. David had tried his best to make amends. He enrolled in counseling, took responsibility for his mistakes, and tried to repair the trust he had broken with Emily. But it wasn't easy. The guilt weighed heavily on him, and Emily could see how it ate at him, day by day. The man she had known was still there, but he was scarred by his choices, and his path to redemption was one he would have to navigate alone. One evening, as Emily sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see David approaching, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. He had been quieter than usual lately, lost in his thoughts, but tonight something was different. There was a sense of resolve in the way he carried himself. "Hey," he said softly, sitting down next to her. "Hey," Emily replied, offering him a small smile. Her heart still ached when she looked at him, but she was trying to move past the hurt, to rebuild, one step at a time. David took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I've hurt you, and I've hurt the kids. I know that. And I wish I could take it all back." Emily didn't say anything right away. She had spent so many sleepless nights wrestling with her feelings. Part of her wanted to scream, to let him know how deeply his actions had affected her. But another part of her, perhaps the part that still loved him, knew that forgiveness was a choice she had to make for herself, not just for him. "I can't change the past, David," she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. "But I can try to build a future with you. If you're willing to do the work." David looked at her, his eyes searching. "I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. Whatever it takes to make things right." She nodded, then let out a slow breath. "I know you will. But it's going to take time. And it's going to take effort. From both of us. And from our kids, too. They need to see you putting in the work, every day." David reached for her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "I understand. I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I can be better. I will be better." Emily squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with a bittersweet sense of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and the scars would never completely fade. But perhaps, in time, they could rebuild their life together. The future wasn't guaranteed, but at least they were both willing to fight for it. As the days passed, Emily and David began the long process of repairing the cracks in their relationship. David attended counseling sessions, focusing on the trauma and manipulation he had endured while trying to gain clarity on how to make amends. Emily, too, sought therapy, knowing that she needed to heal from the deep emotional wounds that had been inflicted. It was an awkward, sometimes painful, journey, but they were both determined to take the first steps toward healing. David also began reaching out to the community, apologizing to people he had known for years. Some of them didn't want to hear his apology, while others were more understanding. But each conversation was a step forward in his quest to prove to himself and to others that he was a man who could change. The children were the hardest part. Their once carefree lives had been turned upside down by the scandal, and though Emily had done her best to shield them from the worst of it, there were no easy answers for them either. The accusations and whispers about their father weighed heavily on their young hearts, but Emily did everything she could to reassure them that their father was still the same man they had always known, even if he had made a grave mistake. One evening, months after the incident at the factory, Emily and David sat down with their children for a heart-to-heart. They had finally come to a point where they felt ready to have an honest conversation about what had happened. The kids listened intently as David explained, in simple terms, the decisions he had made and how much regret he felt. "I know I hurt you," David said, his voice full of emotion. "And I know I let you down. But I want you to know that I will spend every day of the rest of my life making it up to you." Their son, Ben, who was 11, looked up at David with wide eyes. "Will things ever be the same again?" David paused, his throat tight. "I don't know. But I do know that we're going to take it one day at a time, and we're going to work through it together. As a family." Months later, Ridgewood had begun to heal from the shock that had gripped it. People were starting to rebuild the trust they had lost in David, though it was still fragile. Emily had learned to stop worrying about the opinions of others, focusing instead on her family and their journey to recovery. Though David still faced challenges, court appearances, lingering rumors, and the occasional judgmental glance, he was finally in a place where he could accept responsibility for his past mistakes. More importantly, he was no longer running from them. The road to redemption was long, but with every step, Emily and David found a way forward, even if the path ahead remained uncertain. Through it all, Emily held on to the belief that people were capable of change, and that love, though tested, could endure. As they walked down the road to rebuilding their life, Emily couldn't help but wonder, was forgiveness enough? Or would the scars of the past always linger, no matter how hard they tried to move forward? The question hung in the air as they walked together, their hands entwined, toward the future. The days following her conversation with Sheriff Greg weighed heavily on Sarah. She could feel the pressure mounting with every step she took, as if invisible eyes were constantly watching her. The once serene town of Maple Ridge, where she had spent her entire life, was now a place filled with secrets and shadows. Each corner of the town seemed to whisper of something hidden, and each passing day made Sarah feel more and more like she was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. Sarah had not expected to find herself in the middle of a mystery of this magnitude, but now that she was here, she couldn't turn back. The search for the document had become more than just a personal quest to help Jack, it had become a battle for the truth, and the truth was something Maple Ridge was desperately trying to keep buried. She spent her nights combing through town records, speaking to the few remaining veterans who had served with Jack, and trying to make sense of the cryptic clues he had given her. But each lead only seemed to take her deeper into a maze of deceit. She started to question everyone around her, wondering who could be trusted. Friends, neighbors, even colleagues at school, everyone seemed to have their own stake in keeping the past buried. One afternoon, as she was researching old military archives at the town library, Sarah stumbled upon something that made her heart race. It was an old file, buried deep in a forgotten corner of the library's records, tucked away under stacks of outdated books and dusty folders. It was labeled with a number, not a name, and there was no indication of its contents on the cover. But as Sarah flipped through the pages, she found a document that sent chills down her spine, a military report from Jack's time in Vietnam, detailing a covert operation that had never been made public. The report described a series of operations involving high-ranking officials in the government and military. It referenced a secret alliance formed between certain groups in the U.S. and local paramilitary forces in Vietnam. The operation had been deemed too sensitive to release to the public, and most of the soldiers involved had been sworn to silence, their names and actions erased from the official records. But this document, hidden away in the library for decades, revealed that Jack had been one of the key figures in the operation. Sarah felt her hands tremble as she read through the pages. There it was, the proof that Jack had been involved in something much larger than she could have ever imagined. And it wasn't just any covert mission, it was one that had potentially had disastrous consequences, not just for the men involved, but for the country as a whole. This was the secret Jack had been keeping for all these years, and it was the one thing he had hoped would never see the light of day. As Sarah took in the full scope of the report, a realization hit her hard: the stakes were even higher than she had initially thought. Jack had been involved in a dangerous operation, one that had involved corruption, cover-ups, and a dark chapter in the history of the Vietnam War. If the contents of this report were exposed, it could destroy not only Jack's reputation but the lives of countless others who had been involved, many of whom were still part of the fabric of Maple Ridge. The town was built on secrets, and those secrets went all the way to the top. But Sarah didn't feel relief at having found the document. Instead, a sense of dread filled her. What now? The knowledge of the operation was a bombshell, but what good was it if she couldn't trust anyone around her? And even if she could trust someone, how could she get this information out without putting herself and others in danger? The ramifications of exposing the truth were enormous: lives could be ruined, reputations destroyed, and the town's quiet existence shattered. In the days that followed, Sarah wrestled with her conscience. She felt like a key player in an unfolding drama that was far beyond her control. She knew that uncovering the full extent of Jack's involvement would force the town to reckon with a past that it had carefully avoided. But at what cost? The burden of truth felt heavy on her shoulders, and the more she uncovered, the more she began to question whether this truth was worth the destruction it might bring. Her interactions with the townspeople grew increasingly strained. Friends who had once trusted her now seemed to distance themselves, and people who had always been friendly were now watching her with suspicion. It was as if the fabric of the town had begun to unravel, and Sarah could feel herself at the center of it all. She tried to reach out to others for guidance, but each conversation only left her feeling more isolated. No one seemed to know what to do. One afternoon, she met with Jack again. His condition had worsened, and he seemed even more frail than before. Sarah could see the fear in his eyes as he spoke of the past, and the way he clutched the arm of his chair for support. He knew what was coming, and the weight of it seemed to crush him further with each passing day. "Have you found it?" Jack asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, unsure of how to answer. "I found the report, Jack," she said softly. "But I don't know what to do with it. This isn't just your past, it's the town's past. And exposing it could tear everything apart." Jack's face hardened, and for the first time since she had known him, Sarah saw a glimmer of resolve in his eyes. "You have to do what's right, Sarah. The truth isn't something you can bury forever. People deserve to know what happened, even if it means bringing everything down. I've lived my life with that burden. It's time for someone else to carry it. You're the only one who can do this." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to be the one to carry this weight, but Jack's words echoed in her mind. The truth had a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how hard anyone tried to suppress it. As Sarah left Jack's house, she couldn't help but wonder if the town could survive the storm that was coming. She had the information now, but the choice was still hers: reveal the truth and risk everything, or protect the town from the repercussions of its hidden history. Either way, there was no going back. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had the strength to face what lay ahead. The reckoning was coming, and the only question left was how much of the past would be exposed, and who would be left standing in its aftermath. The quiet town of Maple Ridge was no longer the peaceful place it had once been. The secret had been uncovered, and now the town would have to confront the darkness it had long kept hidden. And Sarah, whether she liked it or not, would be at the center of it all.